Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier, and thank you for stopping by. I did this interview with Beatrice Marshall regarding both John Kerry and the Chinese Premier's visit to Africa. It's about 3 minutes long. Do have a look if you have a chance. Obviously, Kerry was last in Angola and the Chinese Premier in Ethiopia. So interesting times indeed, and an interesting conversation I had with Beatrice. My home thoughts, I am actually headed to Poland later today and then to Milan early next week, so I will have to take my leave from you and the podcast for just over a week. My favourite Polish author is, of course, the irrepressible Ryszard Kapuściński, and I've got 3 quotes from him. A journey, after all, neither begins in the instant we set out, nor ends when we have reached our doorstep once again. It starts much earlier and is really never over, because the film of memory continues running on inside of us long after we have come to a physical standstill. Indeed, there exists something like a contagion of travel, and the disease is essentially incurable. That's from Travels with Herodotus. If the crowd disperses, goes home, does not reassemble, we say the revolution is over. And, there were 2 quotations, and I've got one from Don DeLillo in Point Omega. The true life is not reducible to words spoken or written, not by anyone, ever. The true life takes place when you're alone, thinking, feeling, lost in memory, dreamingly self-aware, the sub-microscopic moments. Political Reflections. Ukraine sought to remove rebels from its eastern industrial heartland as violence also spread to the Black Sea gateway of Odessa. The conflict is due to Russian aggression and due to Russian-led protesters, Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk said on the BBC. Zbigniew Brzezinski, who is an advisor to President Obama, says we have an obligation to help Ukraine. He characterizes the crisis as the most important challenge to the international system since the end of the Cold War, and tells Obama he desperately needs to issue a comprehensive statement of what is really at stake and address the American people on this issue. He needs the support of the American people. Thus, he has to convince them that this is important and that his stand deserves both national understanding and support. Putin, by contrast, says, I think what is happening now shows us who really was mastering the process from the beginning, but in the beginning the United States preferred to remain in the shadow, he said. I'll put up a photograph I found on the New Republic of one of the many roadblocks in the capital city of Bangui, and it really is a dystopian world in the CAR. Apparently, the missing Malaysian airline MH370 was carrying 4,566 tons of mangosteens and 200 pieces of lithium-ion batteries, weighing about 2,453 tons, according to the preliminary investigation. Rather laggy. I like this photograph from the Seattle Times, Jet City. China is hunting family members of Xinjiang bombers. This is a report on Reuters. Previously, the attackers would try to leave after they planted the bomb. This time, they'd obviously stayed to be killed, the newspaper quoted another unnamed security official as saying. I wrote about Xinjiang previously when I said I see the pivot to Asia as the encirclement of China, then the shrinking of its operating theatre, and then lighting the tinderbox that is the periphery, and Xinjiang might well morph into China's Afghanistan. You will recall that the architect of Russia's defeat in Afghanistan was Zbigniew Brzezinski, and he remains a foreign policy grise with eminence grise with the president's heir. Currency markets, the euro is back at 138.75. Dollar index 79.46. It climbed much higher on the payrolls number, then was unable to hold its gains. Japanese yen 101.92, touched 101.87, the strongest since April 17. Swiss franc 0.8774, the pound 168.76, rose 0.4% last week, touched 169.20 on May 1st, which was the highest since August 2009. I believe it's going to 173.50. Aussie 0.9262. India rupee 60.06. South Korean won 1029.74. And this is the strongest level for the South Korean won since August 2008. Current account surplus reached $7.35 billion in March. Rial 221.95. Egyptian pound 70053, and the South African rand 1046.57. Sterling has climbed 5.5% in the past 6 months and is the best performer among 10 developed nation currencies tracked by Bloomberg. Euro dollar 138.75. It's very difficult to suppress it. It seems to be in this very tight 138, 139 range. 139, Draghi starts talking quite a lot to try and talk it down. But I think on balance it's well supported, and I expect it to move towards 140. Dollar index 79.46. Data on Friday showed US workers hired workers at the fastest clip in more than 2 years in April, pointing to a rebound in economic growth after a severe winter. Dollar index rallied to a high of 79.852, only then to slide to a session low of 79.469. And basically, I think a number of things undercut the dollar. A worryingly large increase in the number of people dropping out of the labour force, weak wage growth, and escalating violence in Ukraine. I'll put up a 3-month chart of sterling, and these are the highest levels since August 2009. Gold back above 1300 at 1305.54. Not difficult to work out why. But I, for one, think it remains toppy. These are opportunities to set shorts. Crude oil just below 100 at 99.78, and that's just firmed marginally on Ukraine. India rupee, I'll put up a 3-month chart. We're now at 60.04, and I think that heads to 57.50 on a definitive Modi win. South Korean won is at the strongest level since August 2008. Big current account surplus over there. Coming to Sub-Saharan Africa, and everyone's been asking me about the Chinese premier's visit at Xinhua, at CCTV, all of them. Says Sino Africa disputes are just growing pains. Talking about the fact that trade topped $200 billion last year. He's going to start a May 4th through May 11th trip to Ethiopia, Nigeria, and Angola. Said Chinese firms in Africa needed to abide by local laws and regulations, as well as take responsibility to protect the interests of local communities. Chinese government was willing to sit down with African countries to resolve any issues that arose between the two sides, but said these were isolated cases in a relationship based on equality and mutual benefit. In 2009, China overtook the United States as Africa's biggest trading partner, and Xinhua said more than 2,500 Chinese firms operate on the continent. Bilateral trade between China and African countries reached $210 billion in 2013, but Beijing has been accused of holding back the continent's economic development by focusing on the pursuit of raw materials rather than the creation of local jobs and markets. Angola, which is on Lee's tour this week, has become one of China's biggest oil suppliers, crude deliveries rising 9.9% to 10.66 million tons in the first quarter of 2014, second only to Saudi Arabia. And what I told Beatrice as well was I think there's been a linguistic inflection point in the way, in particular, the Chinese are talking about the Sino-Africa relationship. I saw that in the press release by the Premier, talking about uplifting living standards, a much more diverse and sort of pro-sustainability type approach. Important linguistic departure, I feel. Kerry calls for US investment in Africa, warns on corruption, urged greater US investment in Africa to help develop a US-Africa relationship focused on shared opportunity and economic growth rather than on crisis management. We want more American companies to be here, to invest here, both to unleash the power of the private sector in Africa and to create jobs in America, he said. He is on a 5-day visit and stops in Ethiopia, South Sudan, DRC and Angola. Talking about that 37 of 54 African nations will hold national elections, including 15 presidential elections. These elections will be vitally important, but elections cannot be the only opportunity for citizens to shape the future. Nations in Africa, like nations all over the world, are strongest when citizens have a say, when they have a stake in their nation's success. His trip was hastily announced last week, but it is something of an occasion. It's the first time he has set foot in sub-Saharan Africa as Secretary of State, aside from a brief visit just to Addis in May 2013. Genocide risk in South Sudan amid personal power struggle. This is the UN, where Navi Pillay, the UN Human Rights Chief, briefed the 15-member council on Friday. Dieng said the ethnic slaughter of hundreds of civilians in Bentiu, which has now been retaken by government forces, IC, and an attack on a US peacekeeping base in Bor last month had changed the course of the conflict. If such attacks are not immediately halted, it could plunge the country into serious violence that could spiral out of control, said Dieng, who has visited South Sudan with Pillay. In the current situation, we see elements that we could categorize as risk factors of genocide and other atrocity crimes. Military spending in Africa in particular has really shot up. The continent as a whole witnessed an 8.3% jump in 2013, totaling nearly $45 billion. Angola led the way. The first country in Africa, Algeria led the way. It became the first country in Africa to eclipse the $10 billion mark in military spending. Other big spenders in Africa included Angola, a 36% increase, which now devotes more to the military than any other nation in sub-Saharan Africa, including South Africa. South African all-share up 7.63% in 2014 and its record all-time high. South African political parties are holding final campaign rallies this weekend ahead of elections on Wednesday. The ruling party won 2/3 of the vote in the 2009 elections. A lot of people expecting a sub-60% outcome, as do I. Dollar versus Rand, 10.4658 last. I think, as I've told you before, it's going to go to 10 before it goes to 11. And then I came across this interesting statistic. There are anywhere between 150 and 300 Muti murders in South Africa annually, according to a 2006 US Department of State Trafficking in Persons report. In a Muti murder, body parts are removed from a living person, sold and used for medicinal purposes. Bodies are sold for as little as 10,000 Rand, according to a 2010 probe conducted by Mozambique's Human Rights League. The Egyptian pound is back above 7, as it has been for the last few days at 70053. The Egyptian stock market is Africa's best. It's up 23.94% this year. The Nigerian all-share is down 3.67% this year, which is really a creditable outcome in the face of some extraordinary news flow. US diplomats claimed in a revised security advisory for its citizens after the latest Abuja attack that groups associated with terrorism had planned to attack the Sheraton Hotel in Lagos. President Jonathan, who has been silent until yesterday, says Nigeria is facing trying times with terrorism. Economy is going through trying times, terror attacks. The Nigerian government is ready and willing to do anything that will bring this terrorism to an end. We're talking to all countries that might help. He's referring to the Ghana Stock Exchange. was up 5.45% in 2014, but you've lost more because of currency depreciation. 7 killed in Ethiopia amid protests over capital's expansion. Police opened fire on April 29 in Ambo as demonstrators invaded the state-owned construction and business bank after a security guard shot dead a male protester. Interesting piece in Al Jazeera about saying, in choosing security over democracy in Ethiopia, the US will get neither. Saying, to his credit, Kerry raised concerns about the tightening of press freedom in Ethiopia. I made clear to Ethiopian officials that they need to create greater opportunities for citizens to be able to engage with their fellow citizens and with their government by opening up more space for civil society, Kerry told reporters in Abu Dhabi. He also urged the DRC President Kabila to respect a constitutional law which forbids him from seeking a new term in 2016 elections. I believe that it is clear to Kabila that the United States of America feels very strongly, as do other people, that the constitutional process needs to be respected, he said on the visit, and announced the US would provide funding of $30 million to support transparent, credible elections, as well as recovery programs in eastern DRC. I'll put up a photograph of Secretary Kerry meeting with the DRC President Kabila. Here in Kenya, at least 3 people were killed when attackers threw an explosive device at passengers at a bus station in Mombasa on Saturday, and at a luxury hotel in the Kenyan coastal city was damaged in a separate blast. What happened is a grenade was thrown at passengers, Mombasa County Commissioner Nelson Mawa told journalists. The attackers were riding on a motorbike and lobbed the grenade at the crowd of people at the bus terminus. I'll put up a photograph of plainclothes policemen checking the damage on a passenger bus at a scene of an explosion at the populous Mwembe Tayari market, which is practically opposite where my mother is buried, so I know it extremely well. President Kenyatta said the terrorists would like a war of religion, bringing to an end our history of tolerance. The country will not allow it. The terrorists will be treated as the vicious criminals they are, and our tradition of easy coexistence will be maintained. The terrorists wish to see us despairing and divided. They will be disappointed. And I've written about the Swahili coast, and I called it a potential tinderbox from Lamu through Zanzibar and all points in between. That was September 2012. I'll put up a photograph of Mombasa sunset on Boxing Day. Then on Sunday, we heard that there was a twin explosion along the Thika Road, which is a road I take quite frequently. And I wrote about this when I said asymmetric risks are spiking. I was referring to Abu Bakr Shaka's comment that we're in your city, and I said that could apply to both the Al-Shabaab and the Boko Haram. But the frequency and intensity of these strikes is increasing, which is becoming quite alarming, I'm afraid. We have engaged McKinsey to help us with the Route to Market project in order to implement the best model for the Kenyan market. This is Charles Ireland, the Managing Director of East African Breweries. East African Breweries has rallied 12.5% over the last 4 weeks and closed on Friday at a 2014 high. Kenya Airways faces a 14 billion shilling tax bill for 8 new aircraft. That is entirely unfortunate. It's not helpful at all. I learned that the first tweet in Kenya was probably the one sent by the co-founder of Twitter, Evan Williams, from the lounge of the Mount Kenya Safari Club on August 11, 2007. According to White African, there are now 250,000 plus active Twitter accounts in Nairobi, 6 Twitter accounts per 100 Nairobians, against an estimated mobile phone density of 80 mobiles per 100 Nairobians. I'll put up a photograph of the peaks of Mount Kenya, seen from the slopes of the Fairmont of Mount Kenya, and of Hannah riding her horse there as well. Kenya shilling is at 86.788. Nairobi All Share is up 11.123%, and at a record. NSE 20 is up 0.6685% this year, and about less than 1% below the key 5,000 level. The all-share ran 0.476 higher on Friday. It's closed at a fresh record. It's been on a real hot streak and has rallied 11.125% in 2014. Lots of a high volume, which further validates the bullish move. KCBN equity were the most actively traded on Friday. Safaricom unchanged at 1310, 0.75% below a record high set on a number of occasions last month. I expect the price to move through 1350. KCB closed at 50, regaining an all-time high previously reached in 2013. CFC Stanbic rallied 3.88%, is up 24.022% in 2014. Equity Bank has rallied 21.259% over the past 4 weeks. CIC Insurance was the biggest gainer and has posted a blistering 75.63% rally in 2014. EABL rallied 12.5% over the last 4 weeks, closed at a 2014 high. This is a bullish development. Crown Paints closed unchanged at 90, up 20% in 2014, reported strong full-year earnings, where full-year revenue increased 16.38%, full-year profit after tax expanded 60.13%. So, I wish you well. I will take my leave now until probably Wednesday next week, and I am deeply grateful that you do find time to stop by and listen to my musings. Thank you.